The mockery. The Zarkanian warships appeared without warning, their crystalline hulls refracting sunlight across Earth's major cities like deadly prisms. Supreme Commander Vexthor stood at the command center of his flagship, his iridescent scales shifting colors as he watched humanity's pathetic attempts at mounting a defense. His species had conquered 37 civilizations across 3 galaxies, each more advanced than the last. Earth would be his 38th, and possibly his easiest victory yet. Primitive, he hissed, mandibles clicking in amusement as he watched Earth's fighter jets scramble. Their missiles dissipated harmlessly against his ship's quantum shields. They still rely on chemical propulsion and kinetic weapons. How quaint. In San Francisco, Sarah Chen watched the alien ships through the scope of her grandfather's modified M1903 Springfield rifle. At 45, she'd retired from the Marines 3 years ago, but her sniper's instincts remained sharp. While others ran in panic, she stayed perfectly still, observing. The Zarkanian ground forces descended in gleaming pods, their armor seemingly made of living metal that shifted and adapted to their movements. Their weapons were beyond anything humanity had ever seen. Plasma rifles that could vaporize tanks, personal shield generators that deflected bullets like rain off a window. Vexthor himself chose San Francisco for his first personal appearance. His massive form, nearly 9 feet tall, towered over the human delegation sent to meet him. The alien commander's ceremonial armor pulsed with energy patterns that hypnotized anyone who stared too long. Your species still uses gunpowder. Vexthor's translator conveyed his mockery perfectly. He picked up an M4 carbine from a nearby soldier with his gravitational manipulator, examining it like a curious child might inspect an ant. How do you even manage spaceflight with such primitive understanding of physics? The human delegates tried to maintain their dignity, but Sarah could see their fear. From her hidden position in an abandoned office building, she continued to observe through her scope. The rifle in her hands had been modified by her grandfather, a gunsmith who'd survived both World War I and the Korean War. He'd never told anyone exactly what changes he'd made to the weapon, taking his secrets to the grave. Your weapons are less advanced than those used by species we conquered millennia ago. Vexthor continued, his voice carrying across the silent city. We expected at least some challenge here. Instead, we find creatures still throwing metal pellets at each other. That's when Sarah noticed something odd. While the alien soldiers' shields flickered with every piece of debris that hit them, papers blown by the wind, dust, even birds, they didn't react at all to slower-moving objects. A child's ball had rolled right through a shield without triggering it. She watched as Vexthor demonstrated his race's superiority, ordering one of his soldiers to stand still while a human soldier emptied an entire magazine at him. The bullets sparked brilliantly against the alien's shield, but didn't come close to penetrating it. Your projectile weapons rely on velocity to cause damage, Vexthor explained condescendingly. Our shields detect and deflect anything moving above a certain speed. Your bullets might as well be raindrops. Sarah's hands tightened on her grandfather's rifle. The old man had modified it to shoot slower than normal, which she'd always thought was strange. He'd added a complex mechanical system that seemed to capture and release energy in an unusual way. The rounds it fired moved at barely more than throwing speed, but they hit like sledgehammers. She'd never understood why he'd made these modifications, until now. The demonstration continued below as Vexthor ordered his troops to show off their weapons. They carved buildings in half with plasma beams, teleported short distances, and created localized time distortions that froze bullets in midair. You have 1 planetary rotation to surrender, Vexthor announced. After that, we begin cleansing this world for proper civilization to inhabit it. He turned to leave, his guards forming up around him. Sarah's finger rested on the trigger of her grandfather's rifle. She could take the shot now, but that would be foolish. She needed to test her theory first, to understand exactly what she might have discovered. More importantly, she needed to find others who might have similar weapons, who might understand what her grandfather had somehow known was coming. As the aliens returned to their ships, Sarah carefully packed up her rifle. Her grandfather had belonged to a secret society of gunsmiths who specialized in what they called retro-modified weapons. If she was right about the shield's weakness, there might be more weapons out there designed to exploit it. The discovery. In the basement of her grandfather's old workshop, Sarah Chen worked through the night. Scattered around her were journals, diagrams, and letters, the legacy of a secret network of gunsmiths who had seemingly prepared for this very moment. Her grandfather's final journal entry caught her eye. They'll come from above, thinking themselves gods. But gods don't bleed. The workshop's hidden vault had yielded more than just documentation. Behind a false wall, she'd found dozens of modified weapons, Garens, Springfields, even a Browning machine gun, all altered with the same mysterious mechanical systems that slowed their projectiles while maintaining devastating impact force. A knock at the door made her freeze. Through the security camera, she recognized the face. Marcus Rodriguez, her grandfather's old apprentice. She buzzed him in. "You figured it out too?" Marcus asked, carrying a large case. He opened it to reveal another modified rifle. "Your grandfather wasn't the only one who saw this coming. We all thought the old men were crazy, preparing for visitors from the stars with slowed-down bullets." Sarah nodded, spreading out the technical drawings. The alien shields have a fundamental flaw. They're designed to stop high-velocity threats. Anything moving faster than about 300 feet per second triggers them. But slower objects pass right through, Marcus finished. Like a bullet moving just fast enough to penetrate, but too slow to trigger their defensive systems. Your grandfather called it the tortoise principle. Sometimes slower is better. They spent hours analyzing the modifications. The weapons used a complex mechanical system of springs and gears to capture the initial explosive force of the gunpowder, releasing it more gradually. The result was a projectile that moved slowly enough to slip past alien shields, but carried enough kinetic energy to be deadly. "There are more of us," Marcus revealed, pulling out an encrypted satellite phone. "Your grandfather was part of a network called the Retro Engineers. We're scattered across the globe, each with our own catches of modified weapons. We've been waiting, training, preparing, even if most of us thought it was just an elaborate hobby." Sarah's phone buzzed with news alerts. The aliens have begun demonstration strikes, destroying uninhabited areas to show their power. Vex Thor's voice boomed from every communication device on Earth. "Your primitive species requires motivation to make the right choice. These are merely examples of our capability. We need to test these weapons," Sarah decided. "Not just my grandfather's rifle. We need to know if all the modifications work the same way. And we need to do it without alerting them to what we're doing." Marcus made calls. Within hours, a small group gathered in the workshop's shooting range. Former military, gunsmiths, and engineers, all connected to the Retro Engineers network. Each brought their own modified weapons, sharing their knowledge. Dr. Emily Wong, a physicist, helped them understand the science behind their advantage. Their shields are programmed to detect and deflect incoming kinetic threats based on velocity profiles common to modern weapons. They never considered that someone would intentionally make bullets slower. They tested each weapon methodically, measuring velocities and impact forces. The results were consistent. Every modified weapon fired projectiles just slow enough to slip past shield detection thresholds, while maintaining lethal force through carefully engineered mechanical systems. "Your grandfather wasn't just a gunsmith," Emily explained to Sarah, examining the Springfield's modification. "He was a mechanical genius. This system doesn't just slow the bullet. It changes how the kinetic energy is delivered. When it hits, it transfers energy more efficiently than a normal round. Less speed, more impact." As dawn approached, they had confirmed their theory and tested their weapons. But Sarah knew they faced another challenge. how to train others quickly enough to make a difference. They had less than 18 hours before Vexthor's deadline. We need to contact every member of the network, Sarah decided. Not just in America. Globally. The aliens think we're primitive because we still use projectile weapons. Let's show them why we never stopped. Marcus pulled up a secure database on his laptop. There are cells in every major city. Most have their own weapons caches, modified the same way. But we'll need more than just weapons. We need a strategy. Sarah walked to the wall where her grandfather's rifle hung. They expect us to either surrender or fight conventionally. Their arrogance is based on their technology's superiority. But they've forgotten something fundamental about humanity. What's that? Emily asked. We didn't survive this long by being predictable, Sarah replied, taking down the rifle. We survived by adapting, by turning our enemies' strengths into weaknesses. They think our primitive weapons make us vulnerable. But sometimes, the old ways are the best ways. The group spent the remaining hours organizing a global response. As Vexthor's deadline drew closer, resistance cells activated worldwide, each armed with weapons the aliens' advanced technology couldn't stop. Sarah knew their survival would depend not just on their weapons, but on humanity's ability to prove Vexthor wrong about their primitiveness. Tomorrow, they would show the aliens that humanity's greatest strength wasn't their technology. It was their ability to think differently when everything was on the line. The first strike. The sun rose over San Francisco Bay, illuminating Vexthor's flagship hovering above the Golden Gate Bridge. The alien commander stood on his observation deck, watching the deadline approach with smug satisfaction. In his mind, the humans' only logical choice was surrender. Anything else would be suicide. Below, Sarah Chen and her team moved silently through the pre-dawn shadows. 20 operators, each carrying modified vintage weapons, split into carefully planned positions. They'd chosen their battlefield meticulously, the narrow streets of Chinatown, where the aliens' superior mobility would be limited. Remember, Sarah's voice whispered through their secure radio network. They don't know their shields have a weakness. The first strike has to be decisive enough to shake their confidence, but controlled enough to maintain our advantage of surprise. Marcus, positioned on a rooftop with a modified Browning, confirmed his team was in place. Dr. Wong had calculated optimal firing solutions for each weapon, ensuring their projectiles would stay below the shield's detection threshold. The aliens made their appearance right on schedule, a collection squad sent to round up humans who hadn't evacuated. Their arrogance was palpable as they marched down the street, not even bothering to check the buildings around them. Sarah watched through her scope as the alien sergeant activated his communicator. Sector 7 sweep beginning. No resistance encountered. These primitives appear to have fled. She took a deep breath, centering her grandfather's rifle on the surgeon's chest. The shot, when it came, was almost anticlimactic. A dull thud rather than a sharp crack. The alien had just enough time to look down at the hole in his chest before collapsing. For one frozen moment, nothing moved. Then chaos erupted. The aliens spun in confusion, their shields flaring uselessly as more slow-moving projectiles passed through them. They tried to return fire, but their advanced weapons were meant for open combat, not close-quarter fighting. Plasma bolts melted empty walls while human resistance fighters struck from multiple angles. Impossible. One alien screamed into his communicator. They're penetrating our shields. But their weapons, they're not registering on our threat detection systems. Sarah's team moved with practiced precision, using techniques developed over centuries of urban warfare. The aliens' technological superiority meant nothing in these narrow alleys where line of sight was measured in meters, not kilometers. Marcus's Browning opened up from above, its modified rounds moving just under shield velocity. The alien squad's rear guard disappeared under the sustained fire, their shields useless against the seemingly impossible attack. All units, fall back. The alien lieutenant ordered. We need reinforcements. They have weapons that... His transmission cut off as one of Sarah's rounds found its mark. The entire engagement lasted less than 3 minutes. When it was over, an entire alien squad lay defeated, and the resistance fighters had vanished back into the city's shadows. Aboard his flagship, Vex Thor received the news with stunned disbelief. "Show me," he demanded, and watched the combat footage in growing rage. His mandibles clicked rapidly, a sign of agitation his subordinates had never seen before. "How?" he demanded of his chief scientist. "Their weapons are primitive. Chemical propulsion, metal projectiles, technology that hasn't changed in centuries. Our shields should be impenetrable." The scientist's analysis only deepened the mystery. "Commander, these weren't normal projectiles. They were moving too slowly to trigger our shield detection systems, but somehow maintained enough kinetic energy to be lethal. It's not possible with their level of technology." Vex Thor's rage turned to cold calculation. "Find out how they did this. I want every weapon captured, every human resistance fighter interrogated. They turned their primitive nature into an advantage. Now we'll turn it back into a weakness." But Sarah's team was already moving to their next target, spreading word of their success through the Retro Engineers network. Similar attacks were being prepared in cities worldwide, each using weapons the aliens' advanced technology couldn't counter. "They'll adapt," Marcus warned as they regrouped in the workshop. "We've surprised them once, but Vex Thor won't underestimate us again." Sarah nodded, field stripping her rifle with practiced ease. "That's counting on it. Every minute they spend trying to understand our primitive weapons is a minute we can use to prepare the next phase." Dr. Wong looked up from her computer, where reports were coming in from other cells. London successful, Moscow successful, Beijing, Tokyo, Sydney, all reporting shield penetration. The modified weapons work consistently. "What about casualties?" Sarah asked. "Minimal on our side. They never expected to need close-quarter combat training. Their weapons are powerful but unsuited for urban warfare. And their armor," Emily smiled. "Turns out it's optimized to resist energy weapons, not good old-fashioned lead." Sarah turned to the map they'd marked with alien positions. "We've proven the concept. Now we need to scale up. How many weapons can we modify in the next 24 hours? Marcus checked their inventory. "With the network's resources, thousands, but we'll need more than weapons. We need a strategy to force them into situations where their technology works against them." "Then let's give them one," Sarah said, pointing to specific locations on the map. "They think they understand human warfare based on our current military. Let's show them why we remember the old ways." As night fell over San Francisco, more resistance cells activated. The aliens' technological advantage had been their greatest strength. Now, humanity would make it their greatest weakness. The war for Earth was just beginning, and for the first time, the aliens were the ones who didn't understand what they were facing. The underground arsenal. Museums across the globe went dark overnight. Curators and security guards, connected through the Retro Engineers network, quietly emptied display cases and weapons vaults. World War I rifles, Civil War muskets, and even Revolutionary War firearms disappeared into an underground network of resistance cells. In the basement of the Smithsonian, Dr. Amanda Foster, a weapons historian turned resistance coordinator, supervised the retrieval of an entire collection. "Every single one needs to be modified," she explained to her team. "The principles are simple, but the work has to be perfect." Vex Thor's response to the first successful attacks had been swift and brutal. Alien warships now hovered above every major city, their weapons primed. But they were facing a problem they'd never encountered before, an enemy that was effectively invisible to their advanced detection systems. In Sarah Chen's workshop, now serving as a resistance command center, Dr. Wong analyzed captured alien technology. "Their entire defensive doctrine is built around defending against high-velocity threats," she explained. "They never conceived of an enemy deliberately using slower projectiles." Marcus entered with fresh intelligence. "They're adapting, but not fast enough. They've modified their shields to detect slower objects, but lowering the threshold makes the shields useless against debris and environmental factors. They can't maintain them in Earth's atmosphere. Sarah studied the global map, now marked with hundreds of resistance cells. How many weapons have we modified? Over 10,000, Marcus replied. And more importantly, we've decoded the original retro engineers' modification manuals. Machine shops worldwide are producing the conversion kits. Even primitive workshops can manufacture them. The aliens' frustration manifested in increasingly desperate measures. They began wearing physical armor under their shields, but the added weight made them slow and clumsy in Earth's gravity. Their attempts to detect resistance fighters with advanced sensors failed. The modified weapons' signatures were indistinguishable from background noise. In London, a resistance cell armed with modified Lee-Enfield rifles took out an alien patrol from positions in the underground. In Moscow, old Mosin Nagants, their actions smoothed and slowed by careful modification, proved devastatingly effective against alien command units. Sarah's secure communication system crackled with reports from around the world. The resistance had moved beyond simple ambushes to coordinated campaigns. Alien supply lines were disrupted by attacks they couldn't detect coming. Their advanced combat systems, designed to track high-tech threats, were useless against weapons that seemed to materialize out of nowhere. They're pulling back to fortified positions, Marcus reported, marking the alien movements on their tactical display, concentrating their forces where they can maintain overlapping fields of fire. Exactly as predicted, Sarah nodded. They're fighting the last war, preparing for the kind of assault they understand. But that's not what they're facing. Dr. Wong arrived with new testing data. We've refined the modifications further. The latest versions are even more efficient at energy transfer. Same low velocity, but nearly twice the impact force. The workshop had become a combination of museum and advanced research facility. Vintage weapons lined the walls, each modified with precisely calibrated mechanical systems. Engineers and historians worked side by side, combining centuries-old craftsmanship with modern precision. "Vexthor's getting desperate," Marcus said, playing an intercepted transmission. The alien commander's voice carried an edge of fury they hadn't heard before. "These primitives mock us." Vexthor raged. They dare to challenge the most advanced military force in the galaxy with antiques. I want their resistance cells found. I want their weapons destroyed. I want. The transmission cut off as another alien patrol went dark, taken out by weapons their sensors couldn't detect. Sarah picked up her grandfather's rifle, running her hand along its worn stock. He's making the same mistake, thinking that newer always means better, that progress only moves in one direction. The old ways endure for a reason, Dr. Foster added, carefully examining a newly modified weapon. Every technology has weaknesses. Sometimes the best response isn't to match advancement with advancement, but to think differently entirely. Reports continued to flood in. Alien ground forces were retreating worldwide, unable to maintain their positions against an enemy they couldn't detect or defend against. Their superior technology had become a liability, forcing them to rely on equipment that was too complex, too dependent on advanced systems that were now proving vulnerable. "Phase 3, Marcus asked, looking at Sarah. She nodded, turning to the detailed plans they'd prepared. "Phase 3. Time to show them that humanity's greatest weapon isn't our technology, it's our ability to adapt." As night fell, resistance cells worldwide received their updated orders. The aliens had brought their advanced technology to Earth expecting an easy victory. Instead, they'd found themselves facing an enemy that had turned their greatest strength into their greatest weakness. The next phase would teach them an even harder lesson. Never underestimate a species that remembers its history. Pride before the fall. Vexthor stood in his command center, surrounded by holographic displays showing his forces retreating across the globe. His iridescent scales had dulled, a sign of extreme stress in his species. The mighty Zarkanian Empire, conquerors of 3 galaxies, was being defeated by weapons that belonged in museums. Impossible, he muttered, watching another patrol disappear from his tactical display. "We are the most advanced civilization in known space. We cannot be defeated by savages using gunpowder and steel." But the evidence was undeniable. His ground forces had lost control of every major city. Their advanced sensors were useless against the humans' modified weapons. Even their orbital supremacy meant nothing against an enemy that could strike from any shadow, using projectiles their shields couldn't detect. Sarah Chen watched the alien flagship through her scope, remembering her grandfather's words. Technology isn't about having the newest toys. It's about understanding principles and applying them cleverly. The Resistance's final phase was about to begin. Around the world, modified weapons had been positioned in carefully chosen locations. The aliens' retreat had been anticipated, even encouraged. Now they were clustered around their landing zones. Their ships presented perfect targets. "All cells, report in," Sarah commanded through the secure network. The responses came from every continent. Teams armed with everything from modified Civil War cannons to World War II anti-tank rifles, all carefully altered to fire their projectiles just below shield detection velocity. Dr. Wang's voice came through her earpiece. "Final calculations confirmed. Even their largest shipped shields operate on the same principles. They never bothered to vary the detection threshold because they never imagined anyone would exploit it. Commence Operation Tortoise," Sarah ordered. The first shots came from modified naval guns in San Francisco Bay. Their massive shells, slowed by ingenious mechanical systems, passed straight through the alien flagship's shields. The explosions took out its primary propulsion system. Across the globe, similar attacks began. In every major city, resistance cells opened fire with coordinated precision. The aliens' superior technology proved worthless against weapons they'd dismissed as primitive. Their ships, designed to resist energy weapons and hypersonic projectiles, had no defense against shells moving just faster than a strong throw. Vex Thor's rage turned to disbelief as his fleet began falling from the sky. "How?" he demanded. "How are they doing this? Their weapons are centuries old." The answer came in the form of Sarah Chen herself, who had fought her way to his command center with a team of resistance fighters. She found the alien commander staring at tactical displays, showing the complete collapse of his invasion force. "You made a fundamental mistake," Sarah said, her grandfather's rifle trained on Vex Thor. "You thought technology only moves forward. That newer always means better. You forgot that sometimes the old solutions are the best solutions. We are the most advanced species in the galaxy," Vex Thor insisted, his mandibles clicking in agitation. "Our technology is centuries beyond yours." "And that was your weakness," Sarah replied. "You became so dependent on your advanced systems that you forgot the basic principles behind them. You built your defenses assuming everyone would try to match your level of technology. You never considered that we might go backward to move forward." Around the world, alien ships were surrendering or attempting to flee. Their invincible armada had been defeated by weapons their sensors couldn't even detect, a humiliation that would reshape their entire understanding of warfare. "Your grandfather," Vex Thor said suddenly, surprising Sarah. "He modified that weapon you carry. How did he know? How did your retro engineers know we were coming?" Sarah allowed herself a small smile. "They didn't. They just understood something you forgot. True innovation isn't always about creating something new. Sometimes it's about looking at what you already have in a different way." The war ended not with an enormous battle, but with a series of precise strikes using weapons the aliens had mocked as primitive. Humanity had proved that their greatest strength wasn't their technology, but their ability to think creatively and adapt. As Vex Thor was led away in custody, Sarah ran her hand along her grandfather's rifle one last time. The old weapon had helped save humanity not because it was advanced, but because someone had looked at it with fresh eyes and seen possibilities others had missed. The Zarkanian Empire's defeat became legendary across the galaxy, a cautionary tale about the dangers of technological arrogance. They had come to Earth expecting to find primitives with outdated weapons. Instead, they found a species that had turned their own assumptions against them. In museums across Earth, the modified weapons were returned to their displays, but now with new plaques. They stood as reminders that humanity's greatest weapon had never been their technology, but their ability to innovate in unexpected ways. Sarah Chen's grandfather's rifle earned a special place in the Smithsonian. Below it, a simple inscription read, "Sometimes the old ways are the best ways, especially when applied with new understanding."